When Matt invited me to speak at this year's Storytellers, I was thrilled. I love talking to people about my passion for mental health wellness, so I enthusiastically accepted his kind invitation. But as soon as I hung up the phone, sheer panic set in. I started thinking of ways to back out of this appearance. Public speaking absolutely terrifies me. If you can see my hand, this is real. Now, I'm not talking about the normal fear that most people have about giving a speech. I'm talking about a paralyzing fear that keeps me up at night, ruminating about all the things that can go wrong. My mind gets flooded with nagging thoughts like, who are you to be on that stage? You're gonna bomb. Or, that hot guy from Wings is gonna be there. I can't screw up in front of him. See, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety and depression, which means sometimes life for me can feel like a pressure cooker. Because of my anxiety, I'm prone to excessive and uncontrollable worry. It just creeps up out of nowhere and overwhelms me. And if I try to suppress it, it spirals into this nasty feedback loop of feeling anxiety, then feeling anxious because I feel the anxiety, which then of course causes more anxiety. I get physical symptoms too. Headaches, chest pains, and my throat tightens up. And then there's the depression. When I'm feeling depressed, everything, even the simplest things, takes so much more of an effort. Feeling unfocused and overwhelmed, I struggle to get out of bed in the morning. Even things that I usually love feel like a chore. I just want to isolate myself and eat junk food all day, looking for happiness in a bag of salt and vinegar potato chips. Now, there was a time when I was really secretive about my depression and anxiety. I didn't tell a soul about my diagnosis, not even my family or my closest friends. I was too ashamed. I had the misperception that depression was a sign of weakness, a character flaw, but I knew I wasn't weak. As a Black woman, I'd prided myself on my strength. Resilience was in my DNA. I'd come from a long line of survivors and high achievers who'd not only endured the horrors of slavery in the Jim Crow South, but had managed to beat unsurmountable odds to migrate north and become successful lawyers, doctors, and educators. I became a filmmaker and a TV producer. Given my circumstances, I didn't think I had the right or the luxury to be depressed. I had it good. And as a Black woman who'd achieved the American dream, I believed it was my responsibility to reach out and help others to make it too. So I couldn't let my family or my community down by being all up in my feelings. Besides, how could I admit that despite all of the blessings I'd been given, I didn't know how to make myself happy? I thought maybe I was just being ungrateful. So I hid my story and I masked my pain. On July 4th, 2013, my entire world collapsed with a phone call that I will never forget. It was 10:30 a.m. on a gorgeous summer morning when I got the devastating news that my beloved 22-year-old nephew, Paul, had died by suicide. Sorry, I get emotional. He'd been battling years of crippling depression and anxiety. And like me, Paul kept his struggles a secret too. Though he did tell his parents, excuse me, do you guys have any tissue? I'm sorry. I can't read my script. Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to get so emotional today. Okay. Paul, like me, kept his struggles a secret too. Though he did tell his parents and they tried their best to support him, his shame was so deep that he made them promise not to tell the rest of the family, fearing that he would let us down. Oh, thank you, bless you, you're so sweet. I appreciate it. This is a good crowd. Paul and I were very close. He was funny, and he was cool, and he had one of the biggest hearts that I've ever known. We loved hanging out together, watching independent films, Our favorite was City of God. And we were the only two people in our entire family who held the controversial opinion that Prince's music is better than Michael Jackson's. Paul wanted to follow in my footsteps and become a filmmaker. He could have done anything he wanted because he was brilliant. In high school, he was in the International Baccalaureate program and took all AP courses. He graduated with honors and received scholarship offers to 3 different colleges. He attended Morehouse College on a full academic scholarship before transferring to the University of Maryland, also on an academic scholarship, in order to be closer to home. It was in college that the depression and the anxiety consumed him. He took a leave of absence from the University of Maryland, and a year later, he was gone. The most insidious thing about depression and anxiety is how they can rob you of your potential. Education was so important to Paul, and more than anything, he wanted to graduate and pursue his dreams. He understood that he was gifted, and that's what made his condition that much more difficult. As he explained in his last letter, he had so many goals that he wanted to fulfill, but it felt like the world was closing in and suffocating him. He didn't want to die. He just wanted to end the pain. Everyone's struggle with depression and anxiety is different. And though I'd never seriously considered suicide, I could totally identify with how Paul felt. Still, I couldn't understand how this tragedy could have happened to my nephew, a kid who had resources, a family who loved and supported him, and someone who had so much to live for. Overcome with grief and searching for answers, I began to research depression and anxiety, and I was shocked to learn Paul's story is not uncommon. The statistics are staggering. According to a 2017 survey by the American College Health Association, nearly 40% of college students felt so depressed that it was difficult for them to function. 61% said they felt overwhelming anxiety. Students of color, often victims of racial discrimination, report even higher rates of depression and anxiety than their white peers. Suicide is the second leading cause of death on college campuses. And 1 in 12 students, 1 in 12, makes a suicide plan. 40% of students with diagnosable mental health conditions don't seek help. The number one reason cited is the stigma. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could a crisis of this magnitude remain so under the radar? With the sheer volume of people affected, why are we still so afraid to talk about mental health? Things had to change. I made up my mind to combat the stigma, especially in communities of color, by sparking a national conversation around mental health. Not only would I share my story openly, but I'd encourage others to share theirs as well. In Paul's honor, I started a nonprofit called the I Live For Foundation. We collect stories about teens and young adults of color who live with mental disorders, and we create safe spaces for them to connect and share inspiring stories of survival. Because of my love for my nephew and my work with I Live For, I now have compassion and a better understanding about mental health. Where I once refused to acknowledge my own diagnosis, and I viewed others with mental illness as outliers or crazy or dangerous people who lived on the fringes of society, now I know just how commonplace it is. 1 in 5 Americans has a mental health condition, and they are not outliers. There are coworkers, neighbors, friends, and loved ones. With so many people living with mental disorders, isn't it time that we stop stigmatizing it and instead question what's happening in our society that might be contributing to its pervasiveness? For example, there's substantial research that shows how racism and racial discrimination adversely affect mental health, producing depression, anxiety, and extreme psychological distress. Researcher Dr. Joy DeGruy coined the term post-traumatic slave syndrome to describe the residual impact of hundreds of years of trauma Black Americans have been forced to endure both during and after slavery. Imagine this, your child being ripped from your arms and sold to the highest bidder, or being called boy well into your adult years. These things happened to generations of Black Americans over and over and over again with no intervention or mental health aid whatsoever. Fast forward to now. What are the psychological effects of repeatedly seeing news coverage of unarmed Black men, women, and children shot dead in the streets, or held in a chokehold so tight that they plead, "I can't breathe," as they die in police custody? What happens to all of this unaddressed pain and trauma? It gets passed down to the next generation until people decide to get help in order to stop the cycle. Looking at the environment as a trigger, it's not terribly surprising that Black Americans have a 20% greater risk of developing a mental disorder than white Americans. Like my Uncle Jerry said to me jokingly when I told him about my own diagnosis, he said, "Nikki, if you're Black in America and you've never been depressed, you really are crazy." Now, let's look at millennials and post-millennials, like my nephew Paul. Millennials are the first generation to come of age during a time of rapid technological change, globalization, and economic disruption. They've never known life without a cell phone or internet access. They're the first always connected generation. And it seems every day more research comes out about the harmful impact of always being connected on our mental health. The findings are clear. The more time you spend on social media, the more likely you are to feel depressed or anxious. The Child Mind Institute reports that heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 27%. Now, it's not new for teens and young adults to want to measure up to their peers, but addictive social media platforms magnify the problem in a very powerful way. If you think about it, most people only post about their best moments. They create these perfect highlight reels of their accomplishments, on social events, beautifully filtered photos. But despite the fact that we all have problems, most people don't post about them. When's the last time you saw somebody post about that extra 15 pounds they gained? Or their parents' divorce? So when you're scrolling through your friends' news feeds, it's easy to think that their lives are perfect and your life sucks. Social media addiction, bullying, unrealistically high expectations, perfectionism, they're all perils of social media use. Combine that with a divided America, a tough job market, global warming, astronomical student loan debt, and all of the other uncertainties of becoming an adult in today's world, you've got a perfect storm. It's no wonder that millennials have been dubbed the anxious generation, because they're suffering from anxiety at a much higher rate than previous generations for over the last 80 years. When it comes to our mental and emotional health, we've got to stop pretending to be okay. It's okay if we're not. The truth is, most of us are just trying to make it look easy. But beneath the surface, we're paddling away like ducks on a pond, just trying to stay afloat. Life is never going to be perfect, but our best shot at living a fulfilling one comes when we learn to embrace our vulnerability. That's where our true power lies. By facing our fears and insecurities head on, we become conscious of the fact that we can handle whatever life throws at us, even if we need a little help along the way. And our feelings are actually the best indicators of what is and isn't working in our lives. So maybe the next time you're down or anxious, rather than trying to resist the feeling, lean into it and take stock. See if something is out of whack, and if it is, take deliberate action to make things better. And know this, all emotions, even the darkest, scariest ones, will eventually pass, as long as we allow ourselves to process them. These days, I fully accept my diagnosis, and I feel liberated every time I share my story openly. I don't know exactly how much of my anxiety and depression are a result of genetic or biological or environmental triggers, but I do know that it's up to me to do everything in my power to manage my symptoms as best I can. For me, that means daily meditation, yoga, getting plenty of sleep, and a healthy diet. I do my best to identify my triggers and to work around them as much as possible. I limit my time on social media or mindlessly surfing the web, and I'm woke, so I stay informed, but not glued to the 24-hour news cycle. Finally, when I need that extra bit of support, my therapist's number is on speed dial. I will always regret not being open with my nephew about my condition. Maybe things would have turned out differently. But I pray that my words will help others who are suffering silently to know that they aren't alone and to understand that there's absolutely no reason to hide in shame. I believe with my whole heart that we can and we will end mental health stigma, one story at a time. I hope maybe one day that you will join me by sharing yours. Thank you.